All right, we're back. So I've got my brushes over here. I've got paper towels here. I got extra paper towels over here if needed. I've also got a container of water over here for my, and it's just a milk jug with a hole cut out of the front. Very easy, very simple. I'm a real believer in simplicity, and that's so it's something that's going to work well. And so why not use it if it's going to work well? Again, whenever I paint, I always have, or at least if I'm thinking about it, you always have a paper towel. It's an easy way to control the water of the brush. So let's go ahead and get started on this. So again, I was talking about this wall that's sort of an ivory color, and what we're going to do is we're going to take that ivory color, and I started with like yellow ochre. I had a little bit of sort of the red violet, though that was probably too much. But I started with this basic hue, which was yellow, and then I went ahead and made it light, and then I was trying to modify the intensity. Now what I didn't have is I didn't bring my little test sheets. So I'm going to look. I was looking at this to see if this is, the value I want it to be and all that good stuff. So I went ahead and now, I've got this, and again, I'm going to put that down. That might be just a little yellow. We can lower the intensity with a little bit of Payne's gray. That was way too much. That's all right. We're going to use some of that pigment. We're going to take that out. And we're going to say, all right, well, let's go ahead and start with, again, a little more yellow. Got into that Payne's gray. And I think there's still some of the brown in there. So now we're just going to lighten this. So now I've kind of got I can put that down there to see if I like that. I like the color. So we're going to take this and we're going to go ahead and very quickly paint this apple. And again, we're going to go ahead and come around the apple a little bit. Now as we come around this apple, the value of the wall should be getting a little bit lighter. And also remember that watercolor gets lighter as it dries. So we never want to forget that aspect of watercolor. So as this comes around, we want a little bit, just a slight bit more of intensity. So I'm adding just a little bit more orange to this, so that as we come around here, we have a little bit more orange to the apple. I just said orange to the apple. I meant to the wall. Obviously, this isn't for the apple. And let's go ahead and pick up that little bit of moisture. And we're going to come down here, bring this down. And we're going to go ahead and paint in the wall. Okay, so this again is the wall. As it comes over here, it should be getting a little bit duller, a little bit darker. I probably should have a little bit bigger. So we're going to go ahead, bigger brush. So again, as we're doing this, this has, again, a little darker value on one side than the other. Like so. As it comes down closer to the table, it's also going to get a little bit darker, so we're going to go ahead and, I think we'll just drop some of this in. So we should have a little bit of a gradation now. Okay, that's what we want. So we're going to go ahead and we have to wait for areas, I can't have anything that touches that, so I can't work on the table, can't work on the apple. So the only other place we can work on is going to be the cast shadow. So I think last week we talked about, sort of going into the shadow and then dropping in and trying to make gradations that way. Let's go ahead and do it a little different way this week. We're going to start off with the lightest wash, and then we're going to get darker, and then we're going to get darker still. And so what we're going to start off with again is sort of the lightest wash, and so this is going to be the light wash, like so. All right, cutting this in. Just turning the brush around to get that nice edge. The tip of this, it's got a nice clean edge. Now we can also take a little bit where we're gonna tap my brush a little bit 3 or 4 times, make it semi-wet. Let's see if we can soften this edge just a little bit. So I'm stroking with just a little bit of water right next to where I made that, and this is, we just want it to bleed a little bit, soften the edge. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to come into our medium value, and we're going to go ahead and bring out a little bit more. So we're going to bring a little bit more value out. I'm dropping in some of this a little bit to get, again, to keep it nice and soft. I got to be careful. Blues will bleed a little bit more than any other color. I can see where I stroked this right here. It left a little bit of a line. So we're going to go ahead and try to pull some of that off. Again, this is called babysitting an edge. And so you'd have to keep watching that as it dries so that you don't have, too much of an edge form there. Again, I can go ahead and start dropping more of this color in. So I started with the lightest, and then we're going to go darker. And again, that's why not? It's another way of working wet into wet, where you start with the lightest wash, and we've done this before. We just haven't done it with a shadow, cast shadow. And again, it can be a very effective way of getting a gradation. Now I'm going to go a little bit darker, go into my little darker bit. Again, come in here and put in a little richer, darker value. Okay. So again, now this is we need more of our middle value, so we'll bring some of this out and let that sort of bleed out as far as that goes. Look at that sort of just spread, which is what we want. See if I can take the water out. I tapped it on my brush a little bit more, so in my paper towel, tapped my brush in the paper towel, so it's semi-wet. Again, this is bled back out where I stroked this. So what am I going to do? I take the paper towel and using it like an eraser, I'm going to draw along that edge. Like so. Alright. So again, as this dries, I'm going to have to continue to make sure I'm taking more and more of that out. Now, I just realized I just pulled a little bit of that out. Do not resist the urge to drop some more water in there, because what you'll do is you'll get a bloom. So we're going to leave that alone. Once it gets to a certain state, you can't touch it. And so with watercolor, you constantly better to leave it alone than to play with it. That's like the #1 thing to keep in mind about watercolor that people forget. They're like, oh, I think I can, and that's when you get into trouble. So with watercolor, again, better to leave it alone, let it dry and come back, than to sit there and play with it and play with it and play with it. That's when you get into trouble. That's where trouble starts to happen. And it's not, you don't want it. You don't want it, and no one wants that. You know, you just don't want that to happen. So, again, as this is coming in here, we're going to try to continue to do that. That's kind of, I don't think that's going to pull up anymore. I think that's sort of there. We're going to make this sort of a dry brush by tapping it once again, filling it all the way full, and then we're tapping 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever. So we got much less water here, because again, if I have too much water, I'll make blooms. So I made this pretty much a dry brush, and it's just wet enough that I can put some stuff in there. Same thing here. This is sort of doing some weird sort of stuff. So by weird, I mean it's causing a water line. Water lines are not normally what we want, and so I'm just trying to sort of do some actually it's not even semi-wet, this is a dry brush, and what I'm doing is I'm stippling. Whoops, that was too much. Let's go ahead and take more out. Again, tap it, make it a dry brush, and then that will at least blend in a little bit, and then I can go ahead and I can continue to tap this out just a bit. Tap this just a bit. So anyways, and then what I can do if it gets too, like this is getting a little splotchy, so I need to leave it alone. But what I'll do once it dries, I'll come back in with another flat wash, and that will integrate everything, so it won't be so splotchy. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to leave this alone, let it dry, and we're going to come back, and we're going to go to the next stage. All right, welcome back. So we're actually going to work on the apple here. And I'm going to start off, so the apple that I'm going to show you, there's going to be let me try this again. There's going to be a picture of the apple I'm working on that I'm going to put in the video so you can see kind of what I'm dealing with. But we're not trying to match exactly this apple. We're not trying to do, since this is for the beginning watercolor class, we're just going to give a nod to some things that are going on. This apple it's two-tone. It has two different, colors. I guess you could say there's 3 different colors, but if we want to get really technical. But for the most part, we're just going to start, again, giving sort of a nod to what's happening on this apple. So there's a shadow side, there's a lit side. This then starts to go into, it gets warmer, and we're going to start off with a little bit of, as it comes up onto the top ridge, it becomes sort of an orange red. Now I haven't put the orange red on there just yet. I want to wet this down. But I'm going to start with, again, an orange there that I'm going to then tint more red. We need to get this covered. And so I'm trying to give a nod to some of the fact that this is two-tone, but we're not going to go nuts on it. We're not going to do some sort of realistic, photorealistic sort of thing. We're not doing an illustration. That'd be way too much for this class. We're going to certainly do things like that in the future, where we will deal with some of the, the nuances as if we were doing an illustration for a company or something where we really needed that really nice sort of realism. But we're not doing that today. We're going to, of course, make it representational, but it's not going to be like something that's going to be that you'd see published in, New Yorker magazine or whatever, gourmet magazine or whatever, cooking magazine, whatever it is. We're going to start off lighter because we just need to get this wet so we actually start putting some color in here. And I'm going to start off again. We have to get this wet, and so I'm trying to hurry up and get some of this wet. Now again, as this comes up onto here, it gets a little oranger, a little red orange. Well, that's in there now. I accidentally ran over the highlight, but we can deal with that. So we're going to put some of the orange up here for now, that again we can go ahead and tint later and make more red. First we have to get water on this stuff. So we might do this in a couple of passes. With watercolor, better to let it dry and then work over it again than to try to work it and work it and work it. Continually re-wetting it and doing stuff like that. It just is not, it's not a good way to work. You'll end up with the things that are overworked and all this sort of stuff. But I'm using sort of a red-orange, as we're going to start to darken this for the middle values. As this goes over, the reds start to change, and we start to get a little bit deeper red and all this good stuff. Remember that the colors will also fade or get lighter. They lighten as they dry. And that's an important concept to understand when you're painting, that the fact that it's, there's an old saying in watercolor, if it's the color you want when it's wet, it won't be the color you want when it's dry, because again, the color gets lighter and changes as it dries. So we do want to keep that in mind. We have to work very quickly because of that. And so again, I'm going to, and reds are so dark anyways. Reds are a very, very dark color. I should actually be using a bigger brush, but I've got this now, and I'm not going to take the time to change it. I don't have enough time to mess with that. So again, we're going to come over here and get a little bit more of the orange red that's coming up here. And then again, as this comes over here, again, and then as it gets a little darker, it gets a little, we're going to mix between these two reds, becomes more of what we'd kind of call sort of a true red. And so again, we're going to go ahead and start to bring this in for the middle values as far as that goes, down through here. So again, we got the middle values in there. I think we need a little bit darker with this orange red, so we're going to get picked up quite a bit of paint. People will call this sort of a milky, if you mix it on the towel, it'd be milky, or even thicker than that, almost pasty. But we don't want to go to that level. That's just too thick. But we're going to have, again, the warmer reds up top. It's going to be getting into the true reds as it comes down, as far as that goes. So these will be the darker middle values, and this is going to get a little bit lighter because of reflected light at the bottom. So I'm going to take some of this and drop this in down through here. And now we need to get into the shadows. So it needs to be darker, lighter in the lights, darker in the shadows. Now this is the biggest mistake that people who paint, oh goodness, the red invaded. Well, that's really unfortunate. So it blew out all this nice light in here. It bled in there, and I wanted that to stay lighter. So again, I'm going to go ahead and I could block quite a bit of that out, as you just saw. So maybe I can work with it. We're just going to go ahead and soften this a little bit through there. Maybe just a little bit more, not too much water. We don't want to get any of these, we don't want any blooms happening. We're now going to go to the darker side of the red. So we're going to get a little bit of the violets going on in here. Darken that down because we want it to be a violet. We're going to go ahead and darken a little bit with some Payne's gray. That might be a little bit too. So I'm putting some of my red sienna in here. But again, I'm just trying to darken it. This is going to be a violet. Now I think that's too much. So I'm going to bring some alizarin crimson, or in other words, a more red, less violet. It's still a red violet, but it's much warmer. it's closer to true red than it is to red violet. And so this will make it a little what we call warmer. So that just got a little bit too much too quickly. And again, there is some of the of like a yellow in here because it's a two-tone apple. We're going to ignore that. I'm going to go ahead and just make this. So this is my artistic prerogative. You've heard people throw that word around. Some people think it means, well, I'll just do whatever I want. You can do what you want, but you better do it for the right reason. So again, because I'm taking out the yellow, we have to think of what this would look like as a red apple. So I'm probably going to take this apple and I'm going to put another one next to it that is all red, just so that we can, have an easier time seeing what I'm talking about. I'm going to start with the core shadow, which is the darkest part. It's where the light and shadow meet. So again, it should be very, very dark on that in the core shadow, which was what we got here right now. It's flowing very, very nicely, which is nice. Go ahead and take some of this out. That's reflected light, all that good stuff. Again, we're going to go ahead and say, all right, well, then it gets a little lighter and a little warmer. So this is bluer. This is a little more red, as we might say. It's closer to true red. It's still a little on the violet side. It's not quite true red, but it's closer than this over here. We'll see if we can get just a little bit deeper on our reds. Whoa, that'll be dark. Now that looks really, really almost black. But on something again like this, that's gonna dry down lighter. So again, we push this on the apple when we're painting it. Now I need some reflected light. Now for the reflected light, I'm going to make this a dry brush. I'm going to pull some of the paint out of here for the reflected light part of this. So there's my reflected light because it's picking pigment up because I made it a thirsty brush. Then we're going to come over here on the side and we're going to again bring a little bit more, of this purple. That was not what I wanted. Bring a little bit more of this. Okay, that's better. Bring a little bit more of the purple in here. Maybe a little bit more. Because this actually starts to pick up its own cast shadow. When things are round, this will happen. You'll see sometimes this getting this edge right here on the outside edge. And sometimes you're like, wait a minute, I thought the core shadow was supposed to be darkest. And what is that? And why am I seeing that? And you'll only see this on an object that's round enough to do this. And what this is where the cast shadow is wrapping up the object. It's picking up its own cast shadow. And only something that's truly round can do that. That's important because cast shadows, so we have form shadows, we have core shadows, dark tones, reflected light, and then we have light values, middle values, and highlight. But what's always darker than any form shadow is a cast shadow. And so this again is the object picking up its own cast shadow. So there are times where, now it depends on what the light's doing, because sometimes reflected light might blow that out a little bit. But if you ever see an edge on the bottom that's darker than the core shadow, that's because you're looking at a cast shadow. And it's pretty cool stuff. So by doing this, we're starting to get a little bit of the feeling of this apple. Now again, our red kind of bled in here again. So I'm going to see if I can pull some of that back out once more. We're trying to do this all in one shot, and I was just a little too lazy in there. That just got a little bit too much, unfortunately, but we can work with it. This is watercolor. We'll just, babysit that edge, as we like to say. We're going to come back in a few minutes. All right, we are back. So we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of work on the stem. This is still probably a little wet. For the most part, we want to get just, if you can get to this point, we're golden. So for the rest of this, we're actually just going to sort of, again, we're going to start with sort of the lightest bit of the stem. Now, this apple didn't have a stem. I always feel that if you don't put a stem on an apple, it looks, a little naked. So I like to have the stem on the apple. It just looks better. It looks more natural. There's something strange about an apple without a stem on it, I'm just saying. So went ahead and put a stem on here. I'm going to start with a little bit of an orange. It's almost a red orange to start with. Maybe we'll put a little bit of red orange and a little bit of yellow. And then from here we're actually going to use some burnt umber. Now just in case, I'm actually using this fairly dry. Now I have dry paint on here that I'm reconstituting with water, so it's easy to keep it drier. If I was using something that was, was really wet, I'd have to tap the ferrule of the brush to get most of the water out so I don't make it, too wet, because if any of this red is not completely dry, it's going to just flow into there and it's going to make a mess. And we don't want that. So I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to make a light side and a dark side for the stem. And that's it. We're not going to play with this too much. Okay. We're going to darken it a little bit. So we're going to take, that was the brown. Now we're going to get a little bit of the Payne's gray. Maybe a little bit of red, so we have a little bit sort of a violet. Put a little bit of the brown in there. Again, still fairly dry. And we'll put this in here for a little bit of the darker side of that stem. Take a little bit more of the Payne's gray. Like so. So now we got, again, a little bit of a stem, just a little bit of a dark side, light side. We're not trying to detail the stem. We just want enough information that it can look like, whenever you put like a light side and a dark side on an object, it starts to have a feeling of depth. And we start to go, oh yeah, okay, that looks, I'll believe that. And so again, we're not trying to do something really sophisticated. We're just trying to put enough of it on here that our eye says, yeah, okay, I'll buy that. All right. And I think we've got enough of that there where I go, okay, yeah, I'll buy that. Sure, why not? We're going to go ahead and let that dry. So we're going to have to come back, once that is dry. And we're just going to basically work this area and kind of finish this up. All right. So we'll be back. Okay, so we got the stem on here, has dried down a little bit. We're going to try to finish some of this area. Now, originally this goes from red and turns into green. And we're going to want to, and it's in shadow, so we're going to take and glaze just this area. We're going to try to push this back into the shadow that it is. And so we're going to go ahead and bring a little of this green down in here. Okay. Like so. And then what we're going to do is we're going to try to soften that. So I'm going to take a little bit of straight water and we're going to bring this up. And we're going to soften the edge and blend it a little bit as it comes up, and then it starts to go into the light somewhat. And so we're going to bring a wash, some water, and just a little bit of yellow to have this seem like it's warming up just a scotch. And then it's going to start to turn into the light and become redder. So we're going to take a little bit of the red and sort of bring this in as well. Now this is still a little on the shadow side. So now by shadow you might say, well, I thought the light's over here. How can that be in the shadow? Well, there's a bump that's casting a shadow onto this apple. And in fact, there's like a little shoulder where it starts to go into shadow a little bit, that this is a little darker as this then is in casting some of the shadow over here. Start that with a little bit of straight water. I took a little bit of the extra water off before I did that, so it wasn't too wet. We don't want that to be too wet while we're doing that. I think we might have a little bit, looks like that might be a little bit much, so I'm going to dab with this a little bit, pull some of the paint off. And then, down here at the very bottom, we're going to get a little darker. Sort of in the pit of this little funnel, we're going to go just a little bit darker. So we're going to drop in to a little bit of Payne's Gray down there. Just to push that down just a little bit. Okay. Like so. And now we're starting to get the feeling where this is going to be coming in. Now over here, this is where it gets a little complicated because we had the color ran in there. Now I could see, now I don't want to touch where it's wet, but I'm going to see if I can where it's dry. Sometimes we can take a little bit of eraser and we can erase off, lighten the pigment by just the lightest half step. And that's what I want to see if I can do on here. And I don't think it will as much as I had hoped. But that's okay. So here's what we're going to do. I think we might be able to work with it. So this was in green and shadow. Now this was green too, except it's in light. So I'm going to use a lemony yellow, which has a little bit of green to it. And we're going to bring this yellow-green, right? And bring this up. Now this over here is, on this side, that's in light. So this was going into shadow, but this side is catching light. So I'm going to see if I can bring just a little bit of an orange-yellow, cadmium yellow, and see if I can float just a little bit into this red, just to brighten it up just a scotch. Just a little bit. So I think that's, again, I think that's doing its job. I think it's getting it, making it lighter by just a little bit as this comes up. And doesn't look half bad, truth be told. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, again, I'm going to let this dry down. We're going to put sort of the last wash on here and call this a finished little study. All right, so we will be back and we'll get this finished. All right, we're back. So we're going to go ahead and finish out our apple here. I'm going to try to get, and I'm going to keep this as parallel to the surface of the paper as I can. I'm going to get a different brush. I'd like to use as big a brush as possible, but that was just too clumsy. And this is where we really have to, again, try to make sure that we stay within the lines, don't break outside the lines. Try to keep this as uniform as we possibly can. Now, when we make something wet again, it's going to make it look darker. And so, sometimes we do the same thing where we're like, oh, I'm going to lift a color, and we press down a napkin or a sponge, and it looks lighter. But what we've done is we've taken the water off of it, so it looks like what it will look like when it's actually drier. And so we have to keep that in mind. We also have to keep in mind that we have to make things, because they look darker when they're wet. Sometimes we'll put down a color and we're like, oh yeah, that's darker, and it's only darker because it's wet, and then it dries down. We're like, hey, wait a minute, what happened? And it's just the fact that if you're not used to painting with watercolor, even if you are used to painting with watercolor, sometimes you'll do something like that. You're like, oh yeah, and then you very quickly go, oh, wait a minute. And it starts to dry. You go, oh, okay, I remember what this is doing. Because sometimes you'll just be so much into the into the groove, if you will, that you may not pay as much attention as you might, like you should have. And if that happens, again, that's where you start to struggle, because you're like, I just put something down. But so this is what I have to do when I'm adding color to this. I'm gonna put color, but it may, if it's not considerably darker, it's gonna, because when things are darker, that's when things really lighten. When you're really trying to deepen something, like this, where we're trying to really deepen that color, really bring some of the color in there. This is when it's really important to make sure we've got enough pigment down to actually change the painting as it dries, and that's sometimes harder than what it sounds like. Now again, once I do this where it's really wet like this, it's much easier to I lost my train of thought. But we wet this down so that way, first off, it's going to soften anything that we've done on this thing previously, which is, a good thing. What it's also going to do is it's going to help melt, again, some of these strokes in, which again, it can also be a really good thing. So again, as I'm putting this on here, I have to remember it's got to be darker than what I think it should be. Otherwise, it won't be dark enough. And again, that's very important as we're dealing with this. Okay. I think we're doing pretty good for the light side. The one that's really problematic, I think, is the shadow side. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab some color, and we're going to try to really see if we can deepen some of the color through the shadow side of the apple. Okay, so we've knocked down, mostly what we've changed is the reflected light. We don't have near enough difference in the dark tones. So we're going to go ahead and darken just a little bit of these dark tones, like so, which I think will help. And then the last thing we're going to darken is we're going to darken the core shadow. So, and the core shadow is where the light and shadow meet. And it's got to be dark enough so that it's supposed to be the darkest part of the shadows. And so again, we want to get enough of this down here so that it will seem dark enough to really deepen those shadows. I think again, some of this, there's a couple places along here where it needs to be a little bit deeper. No time to be timid. And this is going to be really sort of the last pass on this thing. So again, we needed enough red, because we can't be too violet here. If you do, it's gonna start to look. It'll look less like an apple and start to look like a Concord grape or something. So we got to be careful. I am adding some violet, but I got to be careful I don't add too much, because if it becomes too violet, again, it starts to look like Concord grape juice. Um, I remember, probably see me sort of looking back and forth on this. I'm trying to see if that's wet right through there. We need a little bit of cool color. Oh, it is good. It is wet. So, pardon me. So, again, we're going to go ahead and darken that. We could even put a little bit of blue to cool it down in a couple places, just a bit, to make that seem like it's darker and deeper. And this over here look warmer. We can, whoops, that's too dark. Dropping just a little bit of blue into that red to make it just a little bit more violet. Again, this is halftone, or in other words, middle values, as it's starting to come around here into the light. Okay. I think that'll be sufficient for what, again, this is beginning art class. We're wanting to, sort of take this to the next level. We would go ahead and I'm taking the water off this brush, make it a dry brush, and you would come in here and you try to see if you could soften just a little bit the water lines on the highlight. So that's one thing that you could do. When this dries, I'm actually going to come in here, probably darken the stem just a little bit, and then I'm going to come in here and I'm going to see if I can lighten that. And the way we're going to do it is I'm going to probably take a razor blade and scrape it just ever so slightly. But I just realized there's something else that's going to make this look lighter. Is this edge right here goes a little darker. And as that goes just a little bit darker, this looks lighter. So again, there's all these nuances with apples. Quite incredible, really. But they can also be, if you're not careful, the bane of your existence, as some of my students have told me. That, where everyone's like, "Oh, apples seem so simple," until you paint one, and you go, "Wow, there's a lot going on with those apples." And there really are. But once you start to really look at them and paint them and over and over again, you start to go, "Okay, I can see this, and yeah, I can see that." And all right. And it's just little nuances, like this little bit of that darker edge starts to pop this edge. So it's all about relationships when we're painting. The same thing with drawing. It's all about the basic relationships as you're drawing. Really, really helps. See if I can keep this, get this a little lighter. We need that a little warmer. See if we can come in here. A little bit like that. See if we can lift some of this off just a bit. There we go. That's using a wet brush. I'm pulling some of that off. And it's just a little bit. It's not a ton. We just want a little bit of there's a little bit of reflected light hitting just the top of this before it goes and turns the corner and dives down into that little furrow right there. Furrow. Whatever. The little, as it goes over the top, goes into where the stem is. So again, I think we've got, well, let's see if we can do one last thing. Let's see if we can, this is a little rough through here, so I'm going to take just a little bit of paint. Down through here. A little bit more down through here. Okay, just a little bit goes a long way on this. So we're gonna go ahead and leave that. And this is pretty much the end of the painting. Like I said, once this dries, I'll maybe put just a little bit of Payne's Gray, darken it just down there a little bit. And then I'll scrape this. Now, I'm not going to make it this light. I'm just going to scrape it with a razor blade. Or maybe an eraser. Sometimes an eraser will lighten it too. And I'm going to do it just enough so this gets a little lighter. Now, you can also sometimes... Now, this is some stuff you want to do at the very end. When I'm talking about scraping, and I'm starting talking about heavy erasing and stuff like that, you wait to the very end before you start doing that stuff. And so, and you got to be very careful when you do it too. But I can also sometimes take just a little bit of sandpaper and sand that up a little bit. Or I've seen some people take a little Dremel. Now you have to be careful with the Dremel, but again, have a little sanding tip on the end of the Dremel, sort of a little rounded tip, and they go zip, 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 and it's basically like a heavy duty electric eraser. You can also use electric eraser, that'd be a little lighter, zip, 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 and again, pull stuff out by hitting it with that little eraser, you know, and it'll give you just a little bit of abrasion. So this is, again, we've got a little bit of a waterline happening here that, again, you could take care of. Again, this is some of the stuff that we do to finish off, to take a painting like this and really finish it off. You got to be careful when I'm at this point because this might be too dry, so that's why I'd better just let it dry down. But again, sometimes you'll come over with straight water and lighten up a little where there's a little water line right through there. That's just a little harsh. There's just a couple of water lines here that might be a little bit harsh. And so it's just little stuff like that that you can do to finish this stuff off. But we're not going to worry about that at this point. But if you're like, oh, I'm going to send it into a show and stuff like that, then yeah, you're going to get in there. You're going to do a little bit of, you know, make it look a little nicer. But anyways, this has been Kevin McCain with Idaho Art Classes. This is painting a very basic apple. And again, it's for my painting session 7 watercolor class. And if you stay in watercolor, we're going to do more of these projects, but they're going to get more complex. So we're going to start doing, you can do layering, you can do other things where you can really start to push this to the next level, so to speak. Until we're doing advanced, little tile techniques and stuff like that, where again, you can make stuff that looks highly finished, like something that you would see in an illustration in some sort of magazine or something. So anyways, we're going to go ahead and call this done, and you guys take care and have yourselves a good one.